I found that there was an innermost layer, which I call as the thought layer. Right? Thought is the nucleus, and around which your electrons of character and your behavior and your outermost layers of skill are actually revolving. The moment a child is born, it has a thought. The first thing it wants to do is it wants food.
Okay.
That's a thought, that's an impulse. So leadership in that sense is necessarily a feeling of excess. The people of self-pity can never become leaders unless and until they come out of it.
Welcome to ICT Academy Dialogue. Today we have Mr. Badrinath Narayanan, the people profiling expert with us. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Being this an inspiring morning, I'd like to start this session with a rapid fire question. Is it okay?
Sure.
If at all you wish to have a superpower, what would it be?
Give people more acceptance.
Great. What is the best thing that happened to you the past week?
I got a feedback on my communication skills.
Okay. Positive?
It was actually a critical feedback, so which I am trying to improve upon.
Okay. So, which is your most favorite book and the author?
It would be Black Swan by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. I think it was a path-breaking book.
It's on?
It's on econometrics, particularly looking at statistics and telling us how it actually improves or influences our life.
Okay.
It was a very new dimension in econometrics, I would say.
Econometrics, okay. So what's your inspiration?
I think about 10 years before I stopped looking for big people as inspirations and start looking for the street vendor and the plumber to be my inspiration, because I look for people who are happy and who live with peace with themselves.
Okay. People living with peace with themselves. Great. And getting into the interview now.
Sure.
You have been repeating in your last answer, people, and you are into people profiling.
Right.
What is people profiling and how you embarked on this journey?
It all started with my college. I did my Bachelor's in Sciences program in Coimbatore. I think 6 months into the course, I found that the curriculum that I had in front of me was quite different. And where my mind was leaning towards is quite different. I would say this dichotomy, or to say this conflict, was actually the trigger point towards pursuing what I'm doing today.
Okay.
It's been a very long journey for about 20 years now, but I think I set my foot on that course, and very slowly I've been moving towards that direction. It is principally my quest towards finding out the cause for my restlessness with my own pursuit of life, and finding out where I can be at peace with myself. So this was the quest. So what I'm doing today is originally what I wanted to do for myself. It was not intended for others.
Okay.
Because I wanted to find a solution for myself.
Okay.
Now it has turned out that in the path of discovery towards myself, I would say I was trying to reach myself. That's the word I always use. In that path to reaching myself, what actually happened was that I figured out what are the other dimensions that exist in the world. And today those dimensions, I feel, can help a lot of leaders, anyone who has got a quest towards finding themselves.
Okay. So when you say dimensions, what is that associated with?
Okay. Just to give you probably a background as how I'm arriving at my profiling, to be precise, is that I look at every person having concentric circles of capabilities, right? I would say the outermost capability, or the outermost ring, I would say, would be the skill, concentric skill circle. That is exactly where we interact with another person. We talk to a person in a shop, we go to buy some clothes, or there's a person attending to our problem at our home, to the AC mechanic, to anyone for that matter, or in the office. We are trying to deal with the skill. And if you look at it, about 90 to 95% of the colleges, the effort goes towards building that skill area for any human being. But I would say that's the first layer, probably the outermost layer. For me, the second layer is actually the behavioral layer. Behavior as in, there are pluses and minuses. But I think Carl Jung, as a psychologist, figured it out very clearly with extroversion, introversion, and those kind of dimensions, the judging and the perceiving, those kind of dimensions. So that's the behavioral angle. The third and the most important dimension, I feel, is the character layer, right? When I say third, I'm going deeper. In every step, I'm going a little deeper into the personality of the person. So when you look at the character angle, for example, humility could be a character. Proactive nature could be a character. So these are various character and personality traits that are there in the innermost ring. Now, this could be present, this could be absent, this could be developed, and probably some would say this is not important for me. So it's a choice that a person is making in any of these three circles, I would say. The outermost circle, skill, of course, we are making choices probably every once in 2 years. Behaviors, we are making choices probably every 5 years. Character probably takes about a decade to build, probably, with the conscious effort, with a very concerted effort. So these are the circles. But so there are, for example, if you look at the character dimension, you've got the strengths finder and other psychological tools. And if you go to the layer of behavior, you have MBTIs of the world and whatnot, the big fives and all that. So, but when I started embarking on a journey towards finding myself, I found that none of this actually answered my question is what I want to do with my life. Okay. So I kind of sat down, not once, but probably 100 and odd times to find out where is that, I should actually reach. And then after quite a bit of research, with respect to one dimension was looking at books and other articles and white papers. The other was observing people and fundamentally looking at people who are very much at peace with themselves, right? Who are very calm and composed, and they really had, not in a negative sense, but in a very positive way of control. Not in terms of controlling others, but in terms of in charge of themselves, right? They are not shaken. Yeah. So these are the people that actually inspired me. They could actually be a street vendor selling some vegetables, but they inspired me more than probably a autobiography of a CEO, for that matter. So I started looking for these everyday examples around me, and there were a lot of very interesting people I met in the last 15-20 years, and I made a lot of effort to go and kind of have a 5 minutes, 10 minutes conversation because these people don't give me time. So I had to really work on asking them 3 or 4 questions that really brings out the answer. Yeah. And I found that there was an innermost layer, which I call as the thought layer. Right. I found that was actually the nucleus. And if you look at a structure of an atom, I would say that's the nucleus, which is the thought is the nucleus, and around which your electrons of character and your behavior and your outermost layers of skill are actually revolving. This again was not, in a sense, was quite revealing for me because one dimension is why I thought this was actually a dimension to be explored, is because I think quite when a child is born, it comes to this earth, whether it has a behavioral trait, whether we judge its character to be good or bad, whether it has a skill or not, I think one thing is very clear: it has a thought, right? Okay. And it continues, let's say, for the next 20 years. But probably character, the very next layer, gets added probably by when the child is about 4 or 5 years, because of the societal inputs and the people around them, and we start shaping the character. And behaviors, probably we start correcting it by 3. For example, we tell them how to sit, we tell them how to talk to elders. So these are behavioral traits that we as parents try to add to them. And skill, probably if you are a musician or like say you want to dance or something, then I would say your skill, you start picking your skills by your 7 or 6. But if you don't do that, if you're just a normal person with not adding any extracurricular activities to yourself or sports or anything, then probably you start picking your skills right by your completing your 12th standard or little later than that, probably ideally after your degrees, when you think of yourself as having some skill. Assuming you're doing a BCom, okay, I know accounting, that's a skill, I can use it to get a job or something. But throughout this 20 years, 21 years of your life, even before you enter the job market, one thing's for sure, the maximum time, the maximum effort has gone into thought. And thoughts have always stayed. And the moment a child is born, it has a thought. The first thing it wants to do is it wants food.
Okay.
That's a thought. That's an impulse. And it's very, very intrinsic. Nobody has taught the kid that it has to eat food. So when a child is born, for me, a thought is also born.
Okay.
So I call it the first thought. From the first thought, due to society and due to our environment and all that, we pick up a lot of thoughts over a period of time. But that doesn't still answer my fundamental question, which is what is that I want to do? And that's when I started exploring this thought dimension.
Okay.
So then I started exploring the thought as a utility for me. How is that I use my thought to grow myself? And when I went through various books and works of great leaders or psychologists or the research in genetics and all that, one thing they kept, probably a dimension that kept repeating was that thought in itself, right, is not complete. In the sense that, it's not just one single thought that everybody has, but it's of various dimensions. Not just dimensions. In my research, I also found that they exist in different layers for each and every human being. And not only that, these thought layers don't actually change. For example, when you're talking about in psychology, skill, probably every 2 years you can add a skill, right? If you're talking about behavior, you can change your behavior, provided you get the right inputs. Then you go to probably the character layer. Probably you can do some type development. For example, I don't understand humility, but if I am put around people who are very humble people, I pick that. I understand that humility can help me grow. But as far as the thought is concerned, it's majority of it. I found that it's a fundamental disposition, which means you can't change it. So if I can catch the fundamental nucleus of what I am and start operating from there, I found that you can actually control everything else for yourself.
So your profile shows that you started your career as an HR professional, right? How that helped you or added to your quest?
I think it was just lucky that I landed up in a HR profession. I didn't start as a HR person. To begin with, my MBA was not in HR. It was into marketing and systems. I started with science, moved to MBA, never did a course in HR. And then I got an excellent job with a startup of those days in 2004 and 5. There, the morning I used to do sales, used to meet customers, and that was the first time I got really exposed to different types of people. And in the afternoon, my managing director and my manager wanted me to start getting into recruitments. Okay. They said, why don't you do recruitments, Badri? I said, wonderful, I will do it. And then again, I got another dimension because I was talking to people who want a job, and this is another dimension that was getting added. So again, I got a multitude of opportunities to talk to very different people and with very different backgrounds coming from rural and urban and all that. And then on my second company, when I switched over, I moved completely into HR, into recruitments. And then the whole journey started where I became a HR person completely. So what happened was that one was the variety of people that I started to meet on an everyday basis, and I was doing people management work and all that. But the most important thing was that I was getting exposed to multi-discipline individuals who in their own rights were completely successful, right? I saw two people with very contradicting thought processes, and both were successful. I think this kind of laid the foundation to my theory also, which is like, that's exactly why I said, if we had to grow a little more acceptance into all kinds of people, we can appreciate the fact that everybody can be successful. Yeah. It's also because I feel at times we kind of stereotype as what people should be. And that I feel is the biggest hindrance to finding or reaching oneself.
Okay. So as you have been talking about thought, right? As a recruiter in the process of recruiting, how would you reach that dimension of a person to the level of what thought they bear?
One thing that I always look forward for is the drive in people, right? What drives them, right? What excites a person, right? That varies between people, right? Okay. If you have 100 applications, right? When I interview people, I always found that probably just 10% of them actually are driven about it, right? They have the drive to do that job. It's not just because they want a job, because they want to make ends meet. That's also there. But fundamentally, they like doing it because they like to be in that seat, be in that position, deliver. Right? I actually call that the self-culture of the person. Right? My culture is to be here, to be myself. Right? The opportunity to be myself. So I look out for that. Right? If someone is really excited about something, then the probability that I chose her or him or to that job would be on the much higher side. Rather than just the skills.
So beyond qualification skills, you decipher into what they are as a being.
Yes, what they like as a person. Because if you find someone, if you can relate to someone at their interest level, you can be rest assured that you don't have to invest so much of a time developing them. That is one of the biggest challenges today. If you go to any corporate and ask them, do you know what every individual under you, right, in your corporation understands what their interest is? Probably not. Not that they don't understand about everyone. They would fairly have an idea of at least the leaders for sure. But if you go down, probably that visibility is lacking because of probably time constraints and because they don't have necessary tools and all that. But that's exactly where I can come in. I pitch the tool as a solution towards understanding people. Particularly, this could help an organization or entrepreneur identify who is the next leader. Your whole succession planning can be based on this, because now you are identifying someone who has got a genuine interest with which she will perform the job, and you are not looking for someone who is just going to do the job because the organization wants her to do the job. So the dimension changes.
So as you are talking, you have been time and again using the word tool. And this interests me to ask you another question. That is a programmed bot these days that is in place of recruitment, which is called as applicant tracking system, which scrutinizes the resume which all is fed into this system, and it either selects or rejects the resume or the candidate as such. So would you say this is a right kind of a practice that is in place today?
I think going back to my concentric rings framework, I would say if you're trying to fill up seats with respect to skills, I think recruiters will find great use in this, because it will certainly help them because it quickens the process. But if you're looking to fill leadership positions of responsibility and a very specific output, an outcome as well, then this may not be enough.
So normally, how do you spot leadership trait in persons?
I would go back to asking probably another question. Is how do we define leadership these days? Right. One of the answers that I got when I asked this question while doing this model was that, particularly in India, I would say, we have stuck to this idea that people leaders are leaders. Right. Which means the other dimensions have completely left out. Right. You look at any industry, and I understand because the industry which is operating within a context need to have a lot of people leaders, because end of the day we are dealing with people and all that. But I think in the pursuit of having to manage people, right, for through leaders, at times we lose sight of the special skills or the special minds that are there in the organizations. A leader is someone who has an eye for a solution. So it's a very simple definition, but I thought it's a very effective one, because a leader doesn't have to actually create a solution, right? A leader doesn't have to probably keep looking for solutions all the time. It's even fine if he knows who will have a solution and how to reach out to him or her and ask her to give that solution, so that she can bring it out as a solution to the whole world or to the business. So that for me is most important. So when you say leader, my other question is, what are the dimensions of leaders are we really looking at, right? In that dimension, probably I'll just try to give you an example. If you take the case of one of the prominent examples I would like to take is that of Steve Jobs, right? If you look at Steve Jobs, right, he kind of redefined the whole paradigm of how we should look at smartphones.
Okay.
Right? As a matter of fact, even before Steve Jobs introduced iPhone, a phone with one button, right? That was actually revolutionary. There were smartphones, like I don't remember the names though, but there are a couple of smartphones where you had to use a stylus to operate it. It was a little clumsy. But what happened was that when Steve Jobs actually came out with such a product, right? It kind of redefined the whole industry, and everybody moved behind him, right? Mm-hmm. If we were to think, the person like Steve would have been nurtured in a context of a software company or a smartphone company, I think that would have not been possible. What Steve did was that he rose above the context.
Okay.
Right? That takes me to another dimension also, which is when we actually talk about out-of-the-box thinking, like for leaders and for the teams in organizations, even the out-of-the-box is still within the context. Because you do not want, to a larger extent, to people to come out with very radical ideas. For example, if Steve was an employee and if he would have said, let me come out with a one-button phone, I'm not very sure he would have been approved. Probably he would have been. We don't know. But he was able to think above the context. So to make a breakthrough, at times you have to jump outside the context. And my fundamental question is, do corporates today are willing to take that risk?
Okay.
Probably 90 to 95% you should. I agree that you should still be focusing on stability because you already have customers, you need to keep delivering them. But every time, if you were to only focus on that, what is it you're losing? I think it's precisely you're still thinking out of the box, but still within the context. So the real out of the box for me is outside the context of your present business scenario.
Okay. So does that mean when you look for people, leadership traits in people, you look for such kind of a trait that they are capable of growing beyond the context and they are able to think beyond the context and provide solutions. Is that one trait that you are looking in people?
That's just one of the traits.
Okay.
I would say you still need a lot of people to think within the context. Why? Because if you look at a lot of day-to-day problems and operational issues that you have in any organization, you need a lot of leaders who have to think within the context as well. So even in that, the leadership growth or the position that you offer someone is based on the opportunity that is presented to the company. Yeah. Since the client is asking for such a person, so let's start, okay, we have got 3 people of our choice, let's move him or let's move her because she's the best and let's move her into that position. Not understanding whether he or she can handle it, not understanding whether that role requirement is actually the portfolio of whether it matches that person's thought stream. So I think that's where the conflict is, right? So I would say there are multiple layers within this. In thought layers, I would say there are some people who have to operate within the context and some people probably should be given the leverage outside the context as well.
So how would you suggest to identify these 2 different traits in people?
I think when now India is growing at a rapid pace and the economy is actually moving forward, right? We really need people who can experiment very well, right? You know, some probably thoughts that I would ask leaders is, how many people in your team, right, are really capable of challenging your current scenario?
Okay.
Or how many like to challenge the current scenario, right? How many are willing to take a risk and completely fail and not be bothered about it and start again, right? So these, and probably that's one dimension. Another dimension is, how many of them are willing to take one, probably build a team from the scratch, right? And take them towards a totally new product that nobody else is even taking. So even in people management, you need some risk takers. For example, if you're operating within the context, you know what is the deliverable. You know what is expected by the customer and you know how to deliver it. But you're probably developing a new product, right? Even if you're a people manager, you need to motivate the team and you have to motivate them for whom they don't even know what they're going to deliver. So this is a very unique challenge. But is there someone who can do that? Right? Or are you just looking at someone who's operating within the context? So these are questions probably normally I ask leaders. How different minded people are you really harnessing every day? Are you looking out for every day?
Okay. So you say that mainstream business should not be disturbed. So something beyond that should be happening concurrently. Only with that will enable them to identify the future leaders.
Right.
So do you suggest any kind of such an activity that will get the employees engaged towards identifying themselves?
So the first question I ask leaders is, how much futuristic are you? How much would you want to invest in the future, right? So that answers the basic question. If that is the case, then I would go about identifying the leaders for that future.
Okay.
Because I basically think there are two sets of minds in the creation itself, right? One who offer tremendous stability, who offer the context, within the context play by the rules, and are very, very dependable people, right? The other set of people are quite the rebellious, adventurous, explorative, path breakers, who to an extent will not be reliable also, because you, in the typical sense of a revenue model, you can not be sure that whatever efforts they take will earn you revenue. You need to take that risk. So how much of your business is going to go into the future will determine what kind of methodology we apply to identifying those leaders.
We've been talking about the signals with which you spot or identify leadership traits in people. So what should one do to cultivate leadership traits in oneself?
Rather than the word leadership traits, I normally like to use a different word.
Okay.
I would ask any leader, what are your most recurring thoughts for a very long time, at least for the last 10 years, because if you're a leader already, you should have some recurring thought patterns. This is probably my thought process when I talk to leaders, because I tell them, what are your most recurring thought patterns? Right? Would you like to integrate? Would you like to redefine? Would you like to reconstruct? At times, there will be an architecture, and I recently met an architect, and then she said everywhere, in every project she goes, right, there are 5-6 architects who go together to work on a specific project. She told me, every time I go, the only thing that comes to my mind is, how is that I can dismantle the whole thing and then rebuild it from the scratch? I asked her why. It's already there. You could go about using it. She said no, because when I reconstruct it from the fundamental element that I can offer a very new, beautiful dimension. The other dimension, one of the set of people that I've very closely observed in the last 2-3 years is one set of mergers and acquisition people. I find them to be very, very interesting, because those set of individuals have a totally different mindset. They get really excited about integrating two different elements or two different entities or organizations, or even policies for that matter, which in a normal parlance cannot be integrated. What's more interesting is they have the eye to look at it and then say, hey, these are the common points upon which we can integrate them, and these are the differences we should be working. Not just that, even business integration, like, they've got a product here, we've got a product here, how do we merge that? A classic example, probably I normally quote with entrepreneurs, is Bill Gates, right? He looked at PowerPoint, he looked at Excel, he looked at MS Word. I understand these are very different companies to begin with. They are not actually part of Microsoft Corporation at that point of time. But he had this idea to look at all these different products seemingly disconnected. For example, there is actually not much of a connect between PowerPoint and Excel, to be precise. But he looked at all of this and said, MS Office. Now, this requires a very different understanding. So, which means you understand what the customer wants. You also see the common linkages. You also know how to package them together. Not just that, you know how one can help each other. So, these are very different skill sets. So, these are the different sets of minds. So, these are probably thought streams which can be used to build our leadership traits.
So keeping track of thoughts is what essential to identify the leader within ourselves, right?
Fundamentally, I normally suggest one practice to my leaders with whom I work whenever I want to do the model. One of the things that I do is ask them to write down a set of words that really excite them, right? For example, a simple thing would be, I would give them a word like, say, structure, right? And I would ask them to rate it, number 1 on a scale of 1 to 10. The second I would do them is, I'll ask them in Boolean, do you like it, do you don't like it, right? The answer is very, very interesting. There are leaders who say structure is not important. If you were to work in a creative industry, right, they would say that structure is the least important. The most important is idea.
Yeah.
Right. We go to a software company. Structure is the most important, and the idea should be below the structure. It should be part of the structure and help build the structure. You talk to an employee who walking into the office every day. Structure means totally something different. For him, it's about coming on time and leaving on time. So the same word can have multiple meanings and multiple connotations. It could be negative and positive as well.
Yeah.
So I keep giving words to them at times. These are some techniques I use to try and find out what really excites them and what really puts them down. Right. What's interesting is that I also found is that what excites me could completely put off someone, and what really excites them can be completely a negative word for me. So it's so subjective, and that's exactly where I think leadership is.
Is it good to be a follower or good to strive to become a leader?
I'll answer it in two parts. In my research, I believe that you shouldn't cultivate your leadership, but rather find out your leadership.
Okay.
There's a subtle difference, because when you're looking at thoughts, my idea would be to find out your thought rather than cultivate your thought, because I think you don't cultivate your thoughts, you first find them out. What your majority thoughts are. That's point number one. The second part of the question, which is there someone who can't be a leader? I was talking to a great scholar, and I was presenting the model, and we had a discussion. He gave me a very interesting scenario. He said only one set of people can now become leaders. Although they'll have some majority thought streams, they have the potential to become one. They cannot realize it though. Those are the people who have self-pity. Anybody who has a self-pity, right, can never become a leader. Now why? The answer to this question actually lies in who is actually a leader, right? I've got excess wealth. With this wealth, I know I can multiply the wealth for a lot of people, which means I invested into a business, I have skill, put a company, create a company, organization, build that skill, build whatever my skill is, I multiply it for a lot of people, and then make them leaders, right? Okay. So or a politician for that matter. He says, okay, I can rule this place. I can rule this place because I have got this great potential, right? And then I know I can go out and give this potential to the people. So leadership in that sense is necessarily a feeling of excess, right? And those who do not feel excess, right, can never become leaders. Okay. Is my understanding. And which means the contrary, which is the people of self-pity, can never become leaders unless and until they come out of it. Okay. So it's like they're stuck in an infinite loop of self-pity. I don't have it. I'm not bestowed with it. I'm not born in the best family. The best of the leaders were never born in the best family. They all came from very normal backgrounds, probably very tough backgrounds, and they came up. That is because they felt an innate excess in abject poverty. Okay. They have felt excess. I've spoken to a couple of leaders. There is a leader in Coimbatore I met a couple of years before. He started his life as a newspaper boy. So did Abdul Kalam. But one went on to become a scientist, another has built an empire of 1,000 crores. So I don't think any person who's got self-pity will ever become a leader. So it's not actually about leadership, but it's about overcoming the fundamental self-pity and then realizing your excess to become the leader of your majority thought stream.
Okay, great. So self-pity is like, having self-pity is like trying to pour out of a closed bottle, right?
Absolutely.
That's great. So you have redefined cultivating leadership to finding leadership traits in oneself. In which case, can I profile myself without the help of a consultant?
I can actually suggest a technique for this. One of the simple techniques that I suggest to leaders is write down the most important words for you, right, in your life, right? As good as I could actually suggest it as an elimination process, wherein you start writing the words that you like the most and start writing the words that you don't like, right? And then you start putting probably one line saying why you like that word and what it means to you. Okay. That's probably one exercise. If you could come up with 10 words each, right? That will be the first step. The second is talk about or write about the most important leaders who have influenced you throughout your life, who have been of great inspiration to you. Could be a person from next door to probably the scientist or to anybody for that matter. And also write, why you like them. Point number 2. And the third point, the third exercise would be to connect these words to these leaders.
Okay.
Connect only those words that you think are relevant to those leaders, which means you have written 5 names of leaders, 5 different names, and you've got 10 different words. If there are only 2 words relating to one leader, map them. And the third step would be to write a brief about yourself. Amongst these words, right, connect these words and these leaders together to you, to whatever you have done.
Okay.
Right? Write a paragraph about yourself in the last 1 year and crux it to one word. Do you think one of the word that you've written now matches to the word that you like? If there isn't, and if most of the words are coming from the words that you don't like, right, you can be sure you're mostly in a conflict zone.
Okay.
This, I think, is the first step, because you need to understand whether you are in a job or in a work or applying a methodology or an approach in your life which is in consonance with yourself.
Okay.
So the external and the internal, is it in consonance? Is there a synergy? If there isn't, I think that's a great starting point for any leader.
Okay. Could we call that point of conflict as self-pity, as you said earlier?
Not necessary.
Okay.
It could not necessarily be self-pity, but it could just be a lack of awareness. Because self-pity also happens when there is a perceived awareness. For example, I think and I believe that I have not been bestowed with anything.
Okay.
So that is the cause for self-pity. But if I go to a job, I work for about 10 years, and I work because it makes my end meet, and there's an ideal job for me, right? I'm pretty aware. There's no self-pity because I have some gains out of this. So I'm kind of reconciled in my mind. So it is still fine. But in self-pity, the point is there is no reconciliation for the mind. It is, as I said, it's an infinite loop. Here, it's not an infinite loop, but probably, going in one line and then coming back in the line and then waiting for the next line to open up. You're always waiting for it to open up, not understanding that you are the one who has to go and open it in the first place.
Fine. We've been talking about can I profile myself with some guidelines, and now there's a question. Is there any blueprint for leadership?
Talking about blueprint, I'm reminded of a great book by Robert Plowman, Blueprint, How DNA Makes Us Who We Are. And it's a collection of genetic study which has touched upon the most important argument of the century, nature versus nurture. For example, one of the statements that he gives in the book is parenting matters, right, but doesn't make a difference.
Okay.
He says schooling matters, but it doesn't make a difference, right? I think we are in one of the most interesting times where nature of what we are and what we are made of is becoming more and more prominent, and it becomes more important for one to find that out.
Okay.
Answering in the second part, which is there a blueprint, I would say the idea of a blueprint of a person is actually the self himself, right? So it takes a little bit of time and effort to find oneself.
Okay.
But I also have a word of caution here, although I'm practicing it and I propose this model to a lot of entrepreneurs across the various streams. Still my conscience offers me to put a word of caution. This model is not at the skill level or at the behavioral or at the character level. This model is at the thought level, which is at the very fundamental basic of a human being.
Okay.
Right. After I figured this out, after years of research, is that I found that this model actually does, not only to myself and also to entrepreneurs and others to whom I have applied, is that it moves them from one conflict point to a decision point. Now, this is good and this is also bad. Now, why this could be bad is because if someone is looking for a very stable career, I don't really suggest this model to them.
Okay.
Because he or she is very happy, right? I think that is fine, right? But if a person has a quest to know themselves, right, it doesn't really matter what age she belongs. For example, recently I spoke to someone who's just 21 years old. From a commerce graduate, she's taking a very important decision to move into the creative field.
Okay.
She's trying to understand herself, trying to explain to her parents, I gave her the report, and she's taking that report as a proof to show that, she has a very different mind. She wants to pursue that. That's a self-pursuit. That's precisely why I would not recommend, and I don't recommend, selling this model because it offers truth. And truth at times could be very disturbing. Someone who's looking on a quest and trying to come with terms with themselves, come with terms, find the inner peace, right, and find out who they are and what they are made of actually, then this model is very helpful.
Okay. It was an extensive and exhaustive interview with you, deriving out a lot of insights. And now we have this last question. What are the challenges that the future generations will be facing?
I will again look at it in two dimensions, so comparing with the previous generation and the current, and what are the unique challenges they have. I think 15, 20 years before or 30 years before, the whole generation that came into the job market were driven by opportunities, right? For example, whether it was the software boom or the banking boom or the manufacturing boom or anything, right? It kind of defined our careers. Most of us went behind opportunities, and most of us have done well also. But this generation, I think they have a very unique challenge, right? They don't have to earn for someone else. Most of them, right?
Okay.
So this is a problem, and this is also a solution in itself, which means they've got two choices in front of them. Either go with the opportunity that the world is offering, the social, in the society, whatever is there in the economy, or pursue themselves. This is going to be a challenge. Most of the youngsters that I meet today, they are actually very promising for two reasons, right? They are not settling for any kind of a mediocrity, right? They want to with themselves, not about the society. Probably it's also there, but they want to explore themselves first, right? Number one. The second, they want to uniquely understand what is their skill is. A lot of times when I meet them, right, they're quite inquisitive about knowing their nature, right? Because they have seen the curve with their parents and with their cousins and elderly people in the family, and they feel they did what came to them. Can I do what I like? And if I want to do what I like, how is that I arrive at it? How do I know what I like? So this uniquely presents some opportunities and some unique challenges as well. So I think we are going to have one generation, right, going to come into the workforce probably in the next couple of years, and who are already there, who started their career from 2012, 2013 and onwards. They are going to actually be the generation that will push the society a little forward, because most of them, I think, at least even 50% of them, pursue what they like, right? I think it's going to push the whole opportunity for everybody.
Okay. That sounds positive, and we hope great things come for our future generations. Thank you. That was a great show with you today. Thank you for being on our sets.
Thanks a lot for inviting me here. Good day. Thanks.
Thank you. That was ICT Academy Dialogue with Mr. Badrinath Narayanan, the people profiling expert. Follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Thank you.